false start. Trial against Kenya's deputy president forced to adjourn over delay in arrival of prosecution witnesses. Cracking the whip, Nigerian president sacks 9 ministers in the latest reshuffle. In trusted hands, no major changes as Mugabe names a leaner cabinet. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. It's 8 p.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya, 1 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 1 a.m. in Beijing. Now, also coming up in the next hour. Clutching at straws, Dahabshil, Somalia's financial lifeline, still faces imminent closure. And a football shocker, Zimbabwe stuns South Africa amid a fresh wave of optimism in the Warriors camp. We begin at the International Criminal Court, where the trial of Kenya's deputy president has been adjourned for a week, only 2 days after it kicked off. William Ruto is charged with crimes against humanity, but is expected back in Kenya as the first witness against him hadn't arrived. CCTV's Kofam Ranger has more.
How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Even as the trial began on Tuesday, the defense for Kenya's deputy president was making clear the prosecution was not ready and that the case against William Ruto was fundamentally weak.
Witnesses are not here. Witnesses have withdrawn. The case will adjourn tomorrow until Tuesday for want of prosecution witnesses. I don't want Your Honours, or anybody in this courtroom, or anybody watching, to be under any illusion why those witnesses are withdrawn, why they're dropped, why witnesses don't come. Your Honours, we say that there is a rotten underbelly of this case that the prosecutor has swallowed hook, line and sinker.
From late December 2007,
the ICC's chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, insists she can convict Ruto and his co-accused Joshua Arap Sang for their role in orchestrating the violence that followed Kenya's 2007 elections. But on Wednesday, the court did indeed adjourn till next Tuesday, after the prosecution conceded it could not proceed.
The first witness would travel on Thursday and is expected to be in The Hague over the weekend. Monday is a public holiday already in The Hague, which means the next day, which is Tuesday, will be the period when the witness will be presented in the courtroom for testimony.
The trial date was set months ago. Many of the witnesses are said to be in safe houses in various European countries. So what exactly is causing the delays?
We haven't been able to get clearly what the Office of the Prosecutor has said.
But the ICC is denying. It shows the case is weak.
Each party tries as best as possible to present the other party as not having done their job.
Several prosecution witnesses have already withdrawn, one of them just days before Ruto's trial began. Kofam Ranger, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, to discuss the story further, we're joined in studio by Edgar Kavulavo, an advocate with the International Commission for Jurists, specifically the Kenya section. Welcome to Africa Live.
Thank you very much.
Now, just 2 days into this trial and this adjournment, where to from this point?
Well, the prosecutor informed the court that the witness has not yet arrived at the Hague-based court, and therefore he'll be presented in court on Tuesday. This therefore means that the prosecution will be able to interview the witness, and then the defense will have a chance to cross-examine the witness as well as the victim's lawyers.
Now, has there been any detail given as to why the witness hasn't arrived yet? Because previously we'd heard concerns around intimidation, around people that perhaps weren't reliable. What is the situation here?
Well, the prosecution has raised issues of witness intimidation, and they've said that they are investigating into this matter, and those who are meddling into the witnesses will be put to book. But the prosecution has only said that the witness is traveling and be at the Hague on Tuesday.
Now, the defense as well as analysts have already discredited the prosecution as having a weak case, which is something that has come up a number of times. Is there any validity to this argument?
Well, I don't think it has any validity because these are only the opening statements. All the parties have been given a chance to make a case for the clan. So I think it's still too early to say that.
Now, for the defense, what are the chances that this case will be thrown out?
Well, a plea of not guilty was entered yesterday. This means that the case has to be heard to its logical conclusion. So in the meantime, I don't think that the case can be thrown out.
Now, we've also had mixed reaction to the case, apart from Kenya's issues with the ICC specifically. But looking at people on the ground, there are concerns that this may open up wounds 5 years after this post-election violence occurred. Is that the situation? What is your assessment of reaction to this case?
Well, I think it's important that we take a victim-centered approach because the post-election violence had different impact on different victims. Some of them lost their relatives, others lost property. So in a nutshell, all the victims want to see justice to be done to them. So if this is justice for the victims, then I think it's very important.
Now, one of the other issues that keeps on coming up is Africa's concern with the ICC and where Kenya stands on that, specifically looking at withdrawing from that organization. Will there be repercussions from this? What are we looking at continentally?
Well, one of the repercussions is that Kenya as a nation will not be able to access international justice in the near future if the country withdraws from the ICC. So it's very important as a member state to the Rome Statute that we continue with our obligations under the Rome Statute.
Now, is there a disconnect between what is actually happening and looking forward at proceedings? On one hand, we have this potential withdrawal, and on the other hand, we have William Ruto saying he'll fully comply with what the ICC wants. Is there a disconnect between those two positions?
Well, I think our withdrawal will have zero effect to the cases in the court because even if Kenya withdraws from the Rome Statute, the cases will continue in the court. So it's important that we separate politics from law because what is currently happening right now is a legal procedure.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks so much for your time. We're speaking there to Edgar Kavulavu. He is an advocate with the International Commission for Jurists. Now, Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan sacked 9 ministers on Wednesday, and that's according to the president's spokesperson. This is Jonathan's first major cabinet reshuffle since winning the presidential election more than 2 years ago. The ministers of Foreign Affairs, Education, Housing and Urban Development, as well as National Planning, were among those who were sacked. The president's spokesperson told reporters that the ministers will be replaced, but not immediately. Now, a powerful blast has caused serious damage to a foreign ministry building in the eastern Libyan city of Benghazi on Wednesday. The explosion comes on the first anniversary of an attack by militants on the United States consulate in Benghazi, which killed 4 Americans, including the ambassador. It was not immediately known if the blast, which the witnesses say appeared to have been caused by a car bomb, had resulted in casualties. An AFP photographer says a large section of the foreign ministry building had been destroyed and parts of the nearby local headquarters of the central bank seriously damaged. Benghazi is the cradle of the 2011 revolt that toppled and killed Muammar Gaddafi. It's been hit by a wave of deadly attacks in recent months, targeting security force officers and members of the judiciary, many of whom served under the previous government. Well, it's now time for a quick break. When we come back. Trusted hands, no major change as Mugabe names a lean cabinet. The Egypt government bans more than 50,000 unlicensed Muslim preachers.
You have been charged with murder. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
We are receiving some harsh criticisms.
I therefore salute the Kenyan voters for rejecting that blackmail.
And then saying that ICC is targeting Africa.
Do not make it difficult for us.
This week, Talk Africa delves into Africa's love-hate relationship with the International Criminal Court and poses the question, what next, Africa?
You're watching Africa Live. Now, the long wait for Zimbabwe's new government is finally over. The 24-member cabinet, dominated by the old guard, was sworn in today. President Mugabe had kept the nation guessing about his new government following his landslide victory in July elections.
The crucial finance portfolio will be run by former Justice Minister Patrick Chinamasa, who in 2009 formally introduced dollarization. He needs to inspire confidence in an economy that had slowed ahead of the polls.
For me, he's the best of the group that could actually handle finance. Whether he'll be able to actually account for the diamond revenues, whether he'll be able to say, listen guys, we have to limit extraordinary expenditure, I don't know what discipline he's going to have.
A plus is the fact that this is a leaner cabinet. Under an inclusive government, Zimbabwe had 33 ministers. However, Chinamasa himself has no illusions about the task that awaits him.
The major objective is to grow the economy, to increase indigenous participation in the economy from the level where we are, but we do so under a regime of sanctions, and that is the reality. So we have to intensify new friendships, new economic relationships.
A new Minister of Empowerment, Francis Nema, is viewed as moderate, but is unlikely to drastically depart from Mugabe's controversial indigenization drive.
Nema is a quiet kind of guy. He probably gets down and do whatever has to be done. So we're going to get the same process, but with a little less noise.
One of the biggest criticisms of the new government is its failure to adhere to a 50-50 proportional representation by women, in line with the new constitution passed in March.
I'm not very happy, but I am sympathizing with His Excellency that really he tried to balance.
Mugabe also had to pick a minister from each of the country's 10 provinces. The delicate balancing act could have been behind the delay in announcing the cabinet, which is now in place more than a month after the elections. It appears the jury is still out on Zimbabwe's new government, people still digesting those cabinet appointments and perhaps waiting on the ministers to take up their offices and start work before making their determination on whether it's been good or bad. The one thing, though, that is agreed upon across the board is the fact that the announcement has finally been made. A new government now in place and ready to get down to the business of running this country. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, to discuss Zimbabwe's new cabinet, we're joined from Harare by ZANU-PF spokesperson, Psychology Masiwiza, and in our Johannesburg studios, we have Professor Shadrack Guto of the Institute of African Renaissance Studies at the University of South Africa. Let's begin with you, Mr. Masiwiza, in Harare. Now, the new cabinet's been announced and we see a lot of familiar faces. Is this a case of veteran hardliners being rewarded for winning the past election?
Well, the reality of the matter is that we have a combination of new and old faces in the cabinet. But what does that matter? I think one misses the point totally and completely if one judges the capability of the cabinet that was sworn in yesterday by how many faces have been retained or how many new faces are in the new cabinet. I think it's more helpful to look at the trend, the pattern that we've seen in this country since 1980. And that is that President Robert Mugabe has surrounded himself since 1980 with men and women of substance, people of the highest caliber. And I think the test must always be, is this person capable of advancing the interests, the values of the people of Zimbabwe? And I think looking at the list that emerged yesterday, everybody who was appointed on that cabinet passes that test with flying colors.
Now, for some assessment of this new cabinet, let's move to Professor Guto. He's in Johannesburg. Professor Guto, considering the difficulties Zimbabwe has gone through in the past, the political instability, what is your assessment of this new cabinet?
Well, to start with is really to say that the cabinet is really not trimmed down enough. We are dealing with a country with serious economic problems, and we have a bloated cabinet, in my view, where you have almost 29 ministers, the president, if the deputy is appointed, you have over 30, then you have another 10 that are state ministers representing the provinces, and that brings it to over 40, then over 30, and then you have deputy ministers, almost over 25 of them. So that is a bloated cabinet. It is not a small one. But one would say that, yes, there has been a lot of continuity and change. Continuity in the sense that at least 5 or 6 of the ministers are veterans who have been ministers since 1980. The one in Justice and Constitutional Affairs. You do have the one in Finance, whom you have already mentioned. We have one in Presidential Affairs, one in Defense, and so on. Those are very old ministers, and they have been with Robert Mugabe all the time. But if we look at the challenges facing Zimbabwe, it is one where you are dealing really with a situation where in the last 5 years there was power sharing, and within that power sharing, the opposition part did a lot in the area of economic, on the area of finance, trying to woo the international community to really start investing in Zimbabwe, in trying to fight to the lifting of the embargoes, limited embargoes that were there, and also so-called targeted embargoes. The question is whether now that ZANU-PF alone is in power, how it is going to manage that. And I believe that that is the first challenge. The second, of course, I've already mentioned that the cabinet is too big, it's going to swallow a lot of resources in Zimbabwe. The third, which I think is very important, is how Zimbabwe begins to have a strategy of really trying to woo the diaspora into remitting a lot of resources and investing, not just remittances to keep their family alive, but actually to invest in the country, because it is a very large part of the population that was also denied the right to vote.
All right, Professor Guto, we're going to leave it there for just a second, and let's return to Mr. Masiwiza. Now, as Professor Guto mentioned, the MDC did play a significant role in the previous cabinet in terms of wooing investors and also sort of bringing the international community to a position of comfort. Apart from that, would you say that also as a way of unifying Zimbabwe, that room should have been made for some of those MDC cabinet members?
Well, to have done so would have been a very bizarre arrangement indeed. I say that because on July 31st, the people of Zimbabwe made their choice abundantly clear, and that was to say we want President Robert Mugabe to be at the helm of our politics, and that we would like to see a ZANU-PF-only government. It would not have been appropriate for anybody to have gone against that very clear mandate. The fact of the matter is that the MDC joined the coalition government, they went into elections and they didn't win. But that's besides the point. President Robert Mugabe is a unifier. Since 1980, for example, he's been very conciliatory. And even as recent as a few weeks ago, during his inauguration, he reached out to everybody, to every citizen, even to opposition politicians, including outgoing Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai, Arthur Mutambara, and Washington Ncube. And I think that is the kind of leadership we want to see in this country. This new government is a government by, of, and for the people of Zimbabwe. President Robert Mugabe is going to rule and govern this country over the next 5 years, not as First Secretary of ZANU-PF or as President of ZANU-PF, but as President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. And it doesn't need MDC people to be able to do that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, certainly a debate that requires more time. We're speaking there to the ZANU-PF spokesperson. That was Psychology Masiwiza, as well as Professor Shadrack Guto in Johannesburg. Now, the Central African Republic's President, Michel Djodoche, dismissed the head of the armed forces on Tuesday after days of fighting with gunmen loyal to ousted leader Francois Bozize. At least 100 people were killed in the clashes. AFRICOM has now returned to Bozizé's home region, Bosangwa, about 300 kilometers north of the capital, Bangui. The fighting is the latest sign of instability since the Seleka rebel group seized power in March, plunging the nation into chaos and deepening humanitarian crisis. Elsewhere, Guinea-Bissau's parliament has blocked a bill that would give immunity to the leaders of last year's military coup. The bill had been introduced by the interim government ahead of elections in November. Soldiers under the command of General Antonia Njai, head of Guinea-Bissau's armed forces, toppled President Raimundo Pereira and Prime Minister Carlos Gomes Jr. last year, days before a runoff election where Gomes Jr. was favoured to win. And in Mali, the new government's carrying out a complete inventory of existing mining contracts. It stands ready to renegotiate any of those contracts which are not in the West African country's interests. The government, tasked with restoring economic growth and stamping out corruption, took office in sub-Saharan Africa's third largest gold producer after President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta swept a victory in polls last month. The country's mines minister, Boubou Cissé, says the inventory will be conducted under complete transparency and its results will be made available to the public. We take another quick break when we come back. Egypt's government bans more than 50,000 unlicensed Muslim preachers. Welcome back. 6 soldiers have been killed in a double suicide bombing in the Sinai Peninsula. The bombers struck the military intelligence headquarters in Rafah and at a nearby checkpoint. 17 other people were injured, 7 of them civilians. CCTV's Yasser Hakim has more.
Egypt's military has launched a major offensive against Islamist militants in the Sinai. At least 50 militants have been killed in the past 3 days, but they're still capable of striking back.
Latest attacks by terrorists were suicidal, a change of tactics which proves they are in desperation. It's a sign of defeat when you decide to go suicidal because you know that soon you'll either get killed or get caught. The aim is to break the morale of the army.
The crackdown follows the ousting of Islamist President Mohammed Morsi. Critics had accused him of being too lax on militants in the Sinai. The military is trying to drive out around 3,000 fighters. It's also been sealing tunnels and the border with Libya to cut the supply of arms and men.
The security also arrested Brotherhood leaders who have partly funded the militants. The army then pushed all these groups to one area of Rafah on the borders with Gaza. They are now surrounded at the northern tip of Sinai.
Israel described the crackdown as the largest Egyptian military operation since the 1973 war. A large operation, but not without its setbacks.
Sinai is a third of Egypt. It's a huge desert terrain, tough for any army. Militants are waging street battles inside towns and between civilians to make it hard for soldiers. Then there's sporadic attacks on checkpoints and now suicide attacks and car bombs too.
That's why experts say the operations will take some time to achieve its targets. The Ansar Baytul Maqdis group responsible for the assassination attempt on the Minister of Interior has also claimed responsibility for Wednesday's bombings. The army in a statement said these attacks will not deter it from continuing its crackdown until total security is retained. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Still in Egypt, the government there is proposing to outlaw 55,000 Muslim preachers. That could shut down half the mosques in the country. The preachers are unlicensed and the government says they're a threat to security. This report from CCTV's Adel Marui.
Egypt's mosques are frequently a rallying point for protesters. Millions go to Friday prayers, so they are an influential mass medium, and the interim government considers many of them a threat.
Those preachers go in public and encourage people in civil disobedience. Mosques must not become areas of political gain.
Egypt has two types of mosques. Standalone mosques like this one with a preacher appointed by the government, usually a graduate from the only religious studies university, Al-Azhar. The other is known as a corner mosque. These are unofficial and out of government control. Many of the corner mosque preachers have a diploma in religious studies.
Azhar promotes moderate Islam through the teachings of the four main imams, while others would base their understanding of the religious texts without learning the context of why the Prophet said these words. This allows more rigid ideas to emerge, always choosing the harsher of the two explanations, while the Prophet always said to choose the more lenient.
Egypt's endowments minister Muhammad Goma says corner mosque preachers are fundamentalist and dangerous, and he wants to shut them up. It's not clear when that will begin, which mosques are being targeted, or whether the government even has the capacity to do it, but the proposal's likely to be unpopular with many people. This mosque is right across the street from the Minister of Endowment's house. It's a small corner mosque, and according to the vague criteria given, no Friday prayer should be held here anymore, leaving some of the minister's neighbors angry.
Mosques are houses of God. They are not to be banned. No one contacted us, so we don't know what will happen. But I fear that it will be subject to the endowments. If the mosques need something, neighbors always donate, while the government's management will do the same. They have budgets.
I like the decision, but cancelling Friday prayer is wrong. Instead, they must appoint Azhar preachers immediately.
It's a wrong decision. We don't have many standalone mosques. The population in this area is huge, and it's always easier for the elderly to reach the closest corner mosque. I think it's a political decision.
The plan follows a broader crackdown on supporters of ousted Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. Thousands have been arrested in recent weeks. Mosques have been one remaining area of resistance. To gain more control, the minister decided to ban gatherings after prayer times and to prevent direct donations to these mosques. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
New Year celebrations are in full swing in Ethiopia, where it's now 2006. Ethiopia follows a unique calendar, which has 13 months a year, one more than the Gregorian calendar used worldwide. CCTV's Gurum Chala reports.
Pomp and color marked the celebrations all across the country. The excitement of welcoming the new year is uttered in group celebrations. Large crowds like this one stage a colorful festivity every year. Eating and drinking take the lion's share of the holiday.
Ethiopia is the only country to use its own calendar from the rest of the world. And besides that, you see Muslims and Christian citizens celebrating this holiday together, which shows the nature of our coexistence.
Every year on September 11, Ethiopians in the country and the diaspora welcome their new year with group songs praising the upcoming year as well. On the eve, Ethiopians gather around bonfires to sing and dance to a prosperous future. The holiday is special as it gives family members a chance to come together for unforgettable moments.
I celebrate the new year in a joyous way. We bake homemade bread and homemade chicken stew, and we celebrate it happily, doing other things too.
The new year is celebrated colorfully with the presence of everyone in our family, even the ones abroad. I think this holiday is a way to get together with all members of my family.
The ceremony brings out the best in everyone. For instance, the purchasing of sheep, chicken and dining in groups happens in special places. It is a special day where everyone don new clothes to welcome the new year. Children are not left behind in this celebration either. As in the traditional norm, they deliver handmade well-wishing cards to everyone.
Interesting. Many say if anyone comes to Ethiopia from other parts of the world, they will get 8 years younger. Well, at least psychologically. The simple fact is, it is now only 2006 in the country. Krumtala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's now go to Penina for the latest business news.